Assalamualaikum. Hope you are doing good, Prof. Today we will proceed with the article review virtual audio presentation, which titled The Currency Composition of Foreign Exchange Reserve by Hiro Ito and Robert N. McCulley. Today's presentation will be presented by Zulhilmi Zakaria and me, Nurul Afika binti Ahmad Sabri. So the presentation outline for this session will be: first, we will start with background, motivation, methods, main findings, strengths, implications, and then we will end up at conclusion. To begin with, I will briefly explain what is foreign exchange reserve. Foreign exchange reserve are cash and other reserve assets held by a central bank or other monetary authorities that are primarily available to balance payments of the country, influence in the foreign exchange rate of its currency, and to maintain confidence in financial markets. Some countries hold a part of their reserve in gold, and special drawing rights are also considered as reserve asset. However, especially for this paper, the author excluded the gold as well as special drawing rights in their analysis. The objective of this paper is to analyze the factors that govern the choice of the currency composition of official foreign exchange reserve. According to the author, the debate continues in the literature with the dollar US dominated. Since 2014, the China yuan has reversed in some aspects. Its shares of foreign exchange reserve has edged up since it joined the International Monetary Fund (SDR) special drawing rights basket in 2015. And the number of central banks that hold to China yuan continues to rise. However, as we can see, the graph retrieved from IMF website shows that indeed the dollar still dominated 60% of the total. Thus, this led to the motivation of this paper, which when the author found out that the dollar dominance continues as if the post-World War II international monetary system remained intact. The author went through the literature and then encountered severe data limitations that impede empirical analysis. This is due to the IMF currency composition of official foreign exchange reserve, which they refer as COFR. Data generally disclose only aggregate for the entire world, advanced economy, and emerging and developing economies. So this is not specifically to the individual country. Since the author found gap in the empirical analysis, and due to COFR just disclose only aggregates for the entire world, so this study contributes by introducing a new data set on the currency position of foreign exchange reserve. So this section will be discussed further about the methodology part. The author collect data from central banks' annual report, financial statements, and other publicly available information, and construct a data set for 58 economies in 1999 to 2017 period, which allow them to observe reserve management over time for individual economies. As mentioned previously, they exclude gold and special drawing rights for their analysis. The author also used panel regression analysis to find the findings, and they have highlighted three parts of the observation. The first proxy is invoicing of trade-in currencies, which means the share of USD invoicing of exports, or we can say that the US shares in total international trade. The second proxy is currency weight, which means the estimation of core movement of domestic currency with the USD. And the last proxy, which is the third one, is debt stock in key currency, which is the USD shares of the external debt stock. So after this, we will see the findings and it will be presented by my colleague.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. First of all, thank you to my colleague Afika for the introduction and motivation and the background. Okay, going forward, we look on, there is some deficiencies, but to point this out, we will leave it to Yumna's team to do the commentary part for our paper. But however, before I start for slide 5, let me just share with this here what is the uses of foreign exchange reserve itself, because the authors didn't mention about what is the purpose or the function of the reserve itself. Okay, generally we can say the reserve mainly is to help public and to help the government itself in the time of crisis. So it's actually like an emergency fund, like in personal finance we have some sort of emergency fund, that a fund that we allocated beforehand for any crisis or any calamities that happen in the future. But in this case, it is for country. All right, so it's like emergency fund for the country. So that's what it's called reserve. It's like government already allocated a huge amount of money, of asset to make the country resistant to the shocks. So there is a paper written on the evolution of reserve management across the world, especially that we can see in this paper in the time of war, we can see how reserve managers across the world lost huge amount of money, especially in France, Belgium, and Netherlands, especially this after World War One and World War Two, especially, where the governments, central banks, need to churn out a lot of reserve money to fund the war itself and to fund all the necessities in the public at the countries. So that's it. Is to help government, to help country in the time of crisis. And the second function that we can see is reserve management. Foreign exchange reserve is to support and maintain confidence in the policy of monetary policy and exchange rate management. So basically, this is the same like what is IMF pointed out in their guideline of foreign exchange reserve management. So it's like to give a confidence not just for the government, the domestic economic participant, but also to a foreign direct investment. And the other uses is to assist the government in its for its foreign exchange needs and external debt obligation. Okay, so it's like a sinking fund. Like in bond, we have a sinking fund where the bond issuer need to hold some amount of money to help to make it as a collateral in case of default. So, but this is a different thing, but it fits same purpose. But generally, we can say that a sound reserve management practice are important because it can increase countries or regions' overall resilience to shock. Okay, so let's go forward with the slide number 5. This is where just a kind of contents that I prepared for to show all the findings that has been discussed in this paper. So basically, we can divide it into 4 categories, four parts. So part 1, I will explain about the data on currency shares in FX reserve. So, and second, currency zone weights and currency denomination of trade and debt stocks. Part 3, observation in different aspects of international currency and panel regression analysis. Part 4, the authors has done the robustness checks to find out how strong their variables that they have get from the part 3. Okay, let's go on. Okay, slide number 6, right? So this is the first part where the authors wanted to differentiate or wanted to tell us the data sets, the richness of their data set in comparison to IMF data. So we can see for the data on the currency shares in foreign exchange reserve, we can at least extract it from IMF, which is confidential information. And but this paper, the authors took it manually from each central bank across the globe, which is basically 58 central banks across the globe, and that makes the paper have a huge amount of data that we cannot get it from the other place. So the data that the authors have is from the 2000 and 2017, and they compared it with the IMF COFR. COFR stands for Currency Composition of Official Foreign Exchange Reserves. So we can see even the two data set came from different places, but we can see from 2000 until 2017, the USD, the currency shares of USD has lead until 2017. So it's a huge timeline, and they have lead in both IMF COFR and also the data set that the authors collected. And we can see the second is seconded by Euro shares of USD in FX reserve, and this is where the difference came in. From the authors data set, they got a Great Britain pound in number third, and last by Japanese yen. But in the IMF COFR's data set, we see is other way around. And just to mention that this data set is excluding China, where the authors mentioned this because China is the largest FX reserve holder, because the data only came in 2014, and it has created a small bump increase in the graph, but the authors didn't include it. Okay, next slide 7. Okay, this is a graph that that authors have done based on the calculations. They segregate this. They want to measure the currency composition of FX reserve, but this time is according to income and region, and this is against USD and EUR. So for the top left graph, you can see the highest share of USD according to the income level is among emerging markets. So this is not a new thing, because you can see emerging market economies. We've been dealing a lot with USD, with the US more than Europe. So that's one of the main reason why the emerging market has lead in USD shares in FX reserve. And we can see the top left panel of the graph. The last one is advanced economies. So advanced economies shows lower USD share. As you can see, the advanced economy comprise of 33 developed countries, such as US, Canada, France, Germany, Norway, Hong Kong, and many more. And you can see this is quite reasonable, because what would developed countries like US want to hold their own currencies? They want to hold euro or some other currency, especially in the case of crisis. Okay, and at the flip side of coin, we can see at the right hand graph, we can see the advanced economy lead the graph, especially in the euro, in the share of euro. So a lot of advanced economies, they tend to hold euro instead of USD. So that's one very important thing. Okay. Okay. So from the region, you can see the highest is the Western Hemisphere. In the euro, you can see the highest is Western Europe. So Western Europe countries, they tend to hold USD instead euro instead of USD. So this is just a data that the authors just mentioned in the article. So we just go to part 2, okay? Okay, in this part 2, this is the main thing that the authors discussing about the reserve management, about the currency composition in the reserve management. In this part, the authors want to find out the relationships among variables. What's the variable? The variable is the first one is currency zone weight, second one is currency invoicing of trade, and the third one is debt stocks in key currencies. This is all the variables that the authors position in foreign exchange reserve. So just touch a bit about this. The first point, currency zone weight. Okay, countries that use key currency as anchor. Key currency, before I'm going forward, key currencies is at least four currency that we are discussing. Is USD, Euro, Japanese yen, and China, and maybe. Okay, countries that use key currency as anchor or pegging will contribute the higher foreign exchange reserve. What it means by that is the countries that use a key currency, maybe USD or Euro or Japanese yen, to compare with their home currency, tend to use that currency to accumulate the currency share in foreign exchange reserve. So it's like in Malaysia, right? Malaysia has been anchoring with USD a lot, right? We can see from the BNM website. Malaysia use USD as anchor, and we always use that to see how appreciate or depreciate of the Malaysian ringgit. We compare it with USD. That's what we mean by anchoring. So like Malaysia, we have a very huge USD share in our official reserve. That's one point. The second point is the international trade, or in the other words, the authors call it the currency, the invoicing of trade. This is basically the international trade, where corporations, the government itself, across the globe, use international trade each other for export and import things. So the research question that authors raise is whether the international trade influence the portion or the currency composition in foreign exchange reserve, whether when we trade a lot internationally, that using USD, is it that we will hold a lot USD in our reserve? That's the question that authors want to find out. And the last one is debt stocks in key currencies. Basically, this idea is the authors want to say is that economies that use key currency for their external debt tend to hold respective currency in foreign exchange reserve. So it's like debt stock. It's like the stocks, the debt that has been issued by the government or being used, being traded in the country. What is the currency denomination? If it is USD, they tend to hold USD in their FX reserve. So it's like in Malaysia, we have large portion of outstanding bond out there. Of course, is a lot of most of them are Malaysian ringgit denominated, but some of them are the second most currency that bond issued in Malaysia is USD, and that's the idea why we hold a lot of USD in our reserve. Okay, next slide. This is just a example of a financial statement for official reserve. This is as at 31st January to 2020. We extracted this information from Bank Negara website. It's a public information that we can access. It's freely accessible. This is the latest one that we can get. Is as at 30th March 2020. So you can see the item for foreign currency reserve. So Malaysia as at 30th March we have 95.7 billion USD in reserve, where this reserve is sufficient to finance 7.3 months of retained imports and 1.1 times of total short-term external debt. So that's the idea of reserve itself. Okay, slide number 12. This is about the points that we have discussed before. Just want to elaborate more. The previous research has been done. This author pointed this out from Heller and Knight, 1978, shows that a country that pegs this currency to a key currency tend to hold large portion of FX reserves in that key currency. This is basically what the authors want to find out. I mean, the previous research has been done, and it shows that the larger what's the currency that they're pegging is the country tend to hold that currency in huge portion for their reserve. And then after that, the authors mention all of the currency zone weight or currency co-movement in a country. It influenced by the exchange rate policies of the country itself, monetary policies, the interest rate, and all this thing, the inflation rate, and underlying trade relations. So basically the finding is currency's dollar zone weight is positively correlated with dollar share in countries' FX reserves. In other words, is highly correlated. Means when a country's dollar zone weight is a USD, it will influence that they will hold. It will influence the reserve manager to hold USD in their FX reserve. The next slide is a invoicing of trade in key currency. This is for international trade. So you can see the first point. Dollar trade invoicing encourages exporters, especially commodity exporters, to borrow dollars to hedge, and importers to borrow dollars for working capital. This is basically the idea of what makes dollar has been traded across the world. So when a lot of importers and exporters with a different purpose trade with each other using USD, this leads a lot of reserve manager across the world to hold USD. So it's like USD is already international by its nature. I mean, a lot of reserve manager across the world and corporation use USD for international trade. And the finding is the authors found positive relationship between international trade and currency share in FX reserve. It means it's correlated, is highly correlated. Okay, the slide 14. So this is a continuation with the previous this is regression that the authors has done. We just want to go a bit faster. The third point is debt stocks in key currency. This is where I have explained before. A country that has a huge amount of debt denominated in key major currency, they tend to hold their debt currency huge in the FX reserve. And we are talking debt instrument here is about international debt securities and cross-border banks loans. Okay. So finding that the authors has gained is dollar FX reserve share rise 1 percentage point for each percentage point higher. It means that it is highly correlated when we hold a lot of bonds or debt that denominated in USD. We tend to hold a lot of USD in our currency composition in our reserve. So this is the regression that authors done. Slide 16. Slide 17. This is the part 3 where the authors do the regression to find out which of these 3 variables influence most in the reserve. Okay. So this is observation that authors prepared to regress all the variables, which variables influence the currency composition in reserve most. So the author do regression. This is just their observations. Slide 19. So we just go to the results, so you can see what the authors already found out. The result is trade invoicing and currency co-movement exert equal forces in influencing currency composition and FX reserve. So these first two things, variable that we mentioned before, these two elements influence at equal force of the currency composition FX reserve. Okay. So the second point, we can see if economy dominates larger share of trade or in the USD, it tends to hold most dollar dominated in FX reserve. This is what we have explained before. If economy's currency trade with greater stability against the dollar, it tends to hold more dollar denominated in FX reserve. So the higher the larger share, the higher that we do international trade in USD, we tend to hold a lot of dollar in our reserve. If we peg our currency with that, because we find out it's stable, the more that currency we will hold in our reserve. So slide 20. This is the last part where the authors did the robustness checks. This is where the authors want to find out how strong the variable that they have found out. So we won't go each one of these. We just point out the important things. Second point that we can see about the coefficient stability of a global financial crisis. So the idea is when there is a global financial crisis, the USD share in FX reserve increases. So this is because the element of flight to safety. So we can see this is a term that authors pointed out, flight to safety. But in the other part of the discussion in finance, we can find out the idea of flight to quality, where we shift our investment from the high risk investment to a safe haven investment. So it's like in portfolio management, in portfolio management, in fund management, we can see fund manager would move money out from equity to government bond securities or money market funds. So this is element of flight to quality. So in our case, when global financial crisis happen, the reserve manager tend to hold USD more. But the author mentioned, however, not structural change in the choice of USD. So it's not like they really want to hold USD, just because USD more stable in after the crisis. Point 3, we can say this is quite the same with the point number 2, impact of national financial crisis and financial stability. Basically, is when dollar sales happen, the demand of dollar increases. When all the reserve managers, all the corporation, all the governments in the world want more USD, there will be a shortage in USD. So that's what makes a lot of USD share composition in FX reserve increases. Okay. Slide number 21. We go to the point number 5. This is where author says about foreign exchange trading turnover. This is actually the more USD being traded, the higher the USD share. This is basically the finding, the result that the authors have found out, because when a lot of participants, market participants, demanded dollar, a lot of there will be appreciation in dollar, and reserve manager tend to hold USD share in the reserve. And the point number 6 is the size of foreign exchange reserve holding. This is basically the larger the FX reserve, the larger the potential of having USD. The higher the reserve itself, there's a huge potential that the reserve manager to hold USD. Means when we have a huge amount of reserve, there's a potential that we hold a variety of currency as our currency composition in FX reserve. Okay. And next slide. Okay, as the central banks, this we also the authors mentioned in point number 6. As a central bank has a different portfolio in reserve management, i.e., for liquidity, banks tend to reserve USD, while investment they diversify. This is where a very important point, because if you see the perspective of reserve manager, they have a different portfolio, different function that they hold in their reserve. For liquidity, most of the reserve manager hold a lot of liquidity portion in their reserve, because this is a reserve for the country. It's not a pure investment, but they do have investment portfolio, and for the investment portfolio, they diversify with the various currency. But for liquidity portfolio, they tend to hold just USD. And slide number 22, point number 7, this is where we can see how the interest rate and the exchange rate affect the choice or the amount, the portion of currency composition in foreign exchange reserve. So the interest rate and exchange rate may affect currency composition in FX reserve. High interest rate economies make it costly to hold reserve. This is basically a very important point. So high interest rate countries like in American Latin countries like Brazil, Argentina, people don't want to hold these kind of currency because they have a very high interest rate, and it will make the reserve manager cost to hold the reserve in their currency. Rather, this other way around. They are the one who hold a lot of USD in their reserve, because like USD in the US, we have a very stable interest rate and quite low compared to the global interest rate. And the last point is about the impact of financial development and openness. So we can see here a very important point where the more close the economy of the country, the less sophisticated of the economy. When we have a less sophisticated economy, less sophisticated financial market, that will contribute a huge amount of USD in our reserve. It's because the country that have a very complex and sophisticated financial market instrument, they tend to hold a huge variety of currency in their currency composition of FX reserve. This is because they manage with a lot of other currency, not just USD, but country that are more close they tend to hold just USD because they just want to have a stable or as a default assets for its reserve manager. So that's basically the point that the author has pointed out. For the results in conclusion, Africa will continue on this. Thank you.
So as conclusion, the dollar dominance continues as if the post-World War II international monetary system remained intact. The second conclusion is huge sample that authors use produce a steady and robust result because they have used 58 economies from financial statements and annual report of the central bank. And the third conclusion is the share of USD in foreign exchange reserve is higher where domestic currency varies less against the dollar than against the other currency. And the last one is the dollarization and euroization of the domestic banking towards the dollar or the euro in foreign exchange reserve.